Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're thinking about something I reckon we all do. You know, setting these big goals for the future. Maybe it's a dream job or a certain lifestyle, financial security. We make these huge plans for who we think we'll be. But here's the thing I've been wondering about. How well do we actually know that future person? The one we're planning for? And what happens when, well, the you of tomorrow isn't really thrilled with the plans the you of today made?
It's a really common challenge, and yeah, it has some pretty big implications. This deep dive is based on some fascinating stuff from our source, psychaprotein.pdf. It's actually a chapter from a psychology text, looking into how we change over time, often in ways we don't expect. So our mission today is to kind of unpack why we often misjudge what we'll want later, and what that does to our big decisions, especially money decisions.
Yeah.
And maybe find some practical ways to handle this human tendency to keep evolving.
Okay, yeah, let's dive in. There's a really powerful story in the source material we should start with. It talks about a friend of the author's who decided, like as a teenager, he had to become a doctor against pretty huge odds. Apparently, he wasn't, a natural academic whiz for it, but just incredibly hardworking, probably the hardest worker the author knew. And even though everyone thought, no way, he just pushed and pushed.
And he did it, a decade older than his peers. But he became a doctor. You'd think, okay, that's the dream achieved, right? I mean, starting from basically nothing, fighting his way through med school, getting into this really noble profession, sounds like the perfect ending. But here's the kicker. A few years back, the author bumps into him, asks how he's doing, and the friend just cuts him off. Flat out says, awful career, man. Awful career. And apparently he went on about it for 10 minutes, said the stress, the hours, they just ground him down. He ended up feeling as disappointed, really, as he was once determined. It just shows how different imagining a goal is from actually living it, day in, day out, with all the real-life pressures.
Wow. Yeah, that really hits home. To put in all that effort and then regret it so deeply, what does that say about how we picture the future versus, the lived reality? Is it just bad imagination, or is it something more fundamental about us?
That's a great question, and it connects to so many things, right? Like childhood dreams. Think about the 5-year-old wanting to drive a tractor. The source puts it perfectly. Few jobs look better to a young boy whose idea of a good job starts and ends with vroom, vroom, beep, beep, big tractor, here I come. But then, obviously, they grow up.
Exactly. Driving a tractor maybe isn't the lifelong dream after all. So maybe, as a teenager, the dream becomes being a lawyer. Okay, this is it, law school, set for life. But then they get there, and the hours are brutal. They barely see their family, so they pivot. Maybe a lower-paying job, but, more flexibility. Then they realize childcare costs eat up most of that smaller paycheck. So maybe being a stay-at-home parent is the answer. This feels right. And then suddenly they're 70, looking back, and realize staying home meant they aren't really prepared for retirement. It's this whole winding path.
It is. And so many of us are on a similar kind of path, even if the details differ. And what's really interesting is how these stories tie into a basic psychological finding. People are just not very good at forecasting who they'll be in the future. And there's a data for this. It's not just stories. The Federal Reserve, for example, found only about 27% of college grads end up in a job related to their major.
About 27%. Wow.
Yeah. And get this. 29% of stay-at-home parents actually have a college degree. It suggests, life goals change way beyond what you thought at 18. That 18-year-old picking a major just can't imagine how different their priorities might be as, say, a new parent in their 30s.
So it's more than just, tastes changing. It's a fundamental gap in understanding what that future reality will actually feel like. Is there a psychological reason for that blindness?
Yeah, there is. This brings us to Harvard psychologist Daniel Gilbert. He talks about something called the end of history illusion.
Yeah.
It's this really strong feeling we tend to have that our personal evolution is basically just finished. Like, okay, this is me now. This is the person I was always meant to be, and this is who I'll be forever. It's an illusion, but it feels very real.
Gilbert himself said it really well, didn't he? Something like, at every stage of our lives, we make decisions that will profoundly influence the lives of the people we're going to become. And then when we become those people, we're not always thrilled with the decisions we made. That's pretty direct. And you see this playing out all the time, like the source points out. Think about young people paying good money to get tattoos removed that, teenagers pay good money to get. Or middle-aged folks rushing to divorce people that young adults rush to marry. And older adults working hard to lose the weight that middle-aged adults worked hard to gain. It's this constant cycle.
It really is compelling when you lay it out like that. And Gilbert's research actually shows this quantitatively. People from 18 right up to 68 consistently underestimate how much they'll change in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
We genuinely seem to believe our personal history just wrapped up.
Huh. Okay, that's a big idea to absorb. It definitely makes you second guess those big long-term plans. So what does this mean for something really concrete, like long-term financial planning? Charlie Munger always said the first rule of compounding that magic of growth over time is you never interrupt it unnecessarily.
Right, that's the core challenge here, isn't it? How can you avoid interrupting a financial plan, which touches your career, your investments, spending, budgeting, everything, when the person you are, what you want out of life, fundamentally shifts? It's incredibly tough. It's part of why people like Ronald Reed, the janitor who died wealthy, or Warren Buffett are such outliers. They managed to essentially do the same thing, stick to the same path for decades. That let compounding go nuts. But for most of us, we change too much. We either don't want to keep doing the same thing, or maybe life just makes it impossible.
And this source mentions those two extremes in lifestyle choices too. On one hand, you have young people living super simply, maybe very low income, but they seem perfectly happy. On the other, you have people working crazy hours, aiming for luxury and finding satisfaction in that grind. But given this end of history illusion, are there hidden dangers in locking yourself into either of those extremes?
Oh, absolutely. Look, there's no silver bullet here, no easy answer. But the source suggests two really important things to keep front of mind when you're making these big, supposedly long-term decisions. First, try really hard to avoid the extreme ends of financial life planning. So assuming you'll be happy forever living on very little, or committing to endless work for a huge income. Both paths raise the odds you'll regret it later. Why? Because we adapt. That's the thing about the end of history illusion. The initial thrill of having everything, or maybe the simple romance of having very little, it tends to fade. But the downsides, lack of security or lack of time in relationships, those can stick around as lasting regrets, especially if you then feel like you have to, sprint in the opposite direction later to compensate.
So it's kind of like building in some wiggle room, some resilience. The source really pushes moderation as the key to endurance, doesn't it? Talks about a more moderate path, like moderate savings rate, moderate free time, trying not to have more than a moderate commute, making sure you have at least moderate time with family. That kind of balance makes it much more likely you can actually stick with a plan long enough for it to work and hopefully avoid major regrets. It's about sustainability.
Exactly. Balance for the long haul. And the second big point is maybe even simpler, but harder to do.
Right.
We need to accept that changing our minds is okay. It's normal. It's human. Think about how miserable some people are staying in careers only because that's the major they picked when they were 18. I mean, seriously, what are the odds that the job you pick before you can legally drink is still going to be the perfect fit when you're thinking about Social Security? They're pretty low, right? Almost zero.
That makes total sense. It reminds me of that story about Jason Zweig, the Wall Street Journal columnist, when he was working with Daniel Kahneman on Thinking Fast and Slow. Zweig said Kahneman had this incredible knack for just detonating what they'd written. They'd slave over a chapter, get it just right, and then Kahneman would send back a version that was completely different, totally transformed, unrecognizable.
Right. And Zweig asked him basically, how can you just throw away all that work and start over?
Yeah.
And Kahneman said something Zweig never forgot. He said, essentially, sunk costs, anchoring your choices to past efforts you can't get back, are a devil in a world where people change over time.
Mm-hmm.
Holding on to past decisions just because you spent time or money on them makes it way harder to make good choices for the future you.
And that really brings it back to you, the listener. Embracing this idea that goals you made when you were literally a different person might need to be, well, abandoned without mercy. Rather than keeping them on life support and dragging them along, that could actually be a really smart way to minimize future regret. It frees you up to pivot, doesn't it? To get back to building wealth or just building a life that fits who you are now. So if there's one core takeaway for you today, it's probably this. You're not fixed. You're not a statue. Your wants, your goals, even your personality, they're going to keep evolving all through your life. And as this deep dive shows, the you of the past is often a pretty poor guide to what the you of the future will actually need or desire.
Absolutely. Which is why those two strategies are worth remembering. First, aim for moderation in your plans. It builds endurance, helps you avoid those painful regrets from going to extreme. And second, just accept that change happens. Let go of those sunk costs. Don't let decisions made by a past version of you trap the current you.
And maybe here's a final thought to chew on. The faster you can accept that you will change and be willing to adjust course when needed, well, maybe the sooner you can get back on track building the kind of wealth and the kind of life that truly aligns with who you are right now and also who you're still becoming.